We mentioned biotech entrepreneur and GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy earlier in the show, so that he is a candidate, I think, speaking most succinctly and with the most moral clarity in a range of issues from mutilating children to monetary policy. His op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today is really good. He writes about the FOMC presser today, Federal Open Markets Committee. The global market will hang on every word of every FOMC press conference to see what a dozen central planners have to say. That won't be because these planners have any special insight. Everyone will listen to see what the Fed may destabilize next. A really good argument he lays out for changing the role of the Fed and its mission to focus on stabilizing the currency rather than becoming captive to academic fears about where things are economically and trying to provide smoothing out by one manipulation or another. He writes, beginning in the late 90s, the Fed's scope drifted to include smoothing out business cycles. This was a mistake, since business cycles serve a healthy function by transferring the assets and employees of poorly run companies to more capable management. Even worse, the Fed's actions often exacerbated business cycles by creating transitions that create boom-bust bailout cycles. And that's what we've been in for the better part of the last decade. Crises like we're seeing now and with regional banks that spur cries for bailouts that come from politicians who and Federal Reserve mystics who get credit for riding to the rescue of problems they created and exacerbated. Really good piece. Getting more impressed with this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, with each passing day. For more on the topic of rate hikes, bailouts, and debt ceilings, please be joined by Steve Moore, economist and author of Govzilla. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
So what's your take on, let's say the Fed does what is anticipated. It raises rates a quarter point today, and then we go on from here. What's your take on this boom-bust bailout cycle that Ramaswamy writes about in the Journal?
Well, I agree with him that the Fed has been more destabilizing for the economy than stabilizing. And, when I was up to be, on the Federal Reserve, when I was nominated, one of the things that really irritated my critics was that I said that we should have a monetary rule that everybody knows what it is so that these, so-called experts at the Fed can't just make it up as they go along. We've created hundreds of billions of dollars in industry of people just trying to predict what the Fed is going to do next. And if it were all basically based on a formula, then you wouldn't have all these trades that happen based on speculation. And so
CNBC would have to shut down. Yeah.
Exactly. What would economists like me do if we couldn't talk about what the Fed was going to do next? And so all you have to do is have there's something called the commodities index, and you just follow when the commodities index, when the prices of everything from food to eggs to, copper and silver and oil rise, then you know that you've got a problem with your monetary. You got to push back, and if they fall, you have to move it back to where it should be. Anyway, the point about all this is that the Fed is in a tough spot right now because they've had to raise rates because of Biden's $6 trillion spending spree. And it all comes back to that, so many of these problems in the economy, including some of these bank failures, are a result of the chickens coming home to roost of a massive spending spree like we've never seen before in American history. And, bills have to be paid. And when you have that kind of borrowing, it is in flushing all that money into the economy, it causes inflation, and the Fed had to pull it back. So, I'm not going to blame the Fed on this current crisis because it's all due to, Biden's spending policies, in my opinion.
Well, First Republic Bank, I know Elizabeth Warren, they caught her in the hallways yesterday and said, is this the last bank to fail? And she said, I don't think so. I don't know. Is this the last one to fail? or is there more coming?
Probably not. I mean, just yesterday, there were two or three banks that fell by 30% in terms of their, stocks. So I think there may, and I'm not a total expert on the banking industry by any means, but some of these smaller community banks are in trouble. And by the way, the reason they're in trouble is because when they bought these government bonds, because government bonds were supposed to be the safest thing to hold, right? Just like before the housing crisis, remember this, Dan? They said the safest thing for a bank to hold is a mortgage, is a mortgage-backed security. And of course, those crashed, and then that caused the banking system to crash. And now the banks hold all these government bonds because those are supposed to be the safest thing to hold. Except when you're holding a government bond that has, they say, a 2.5% interest rate, and then interest rates rise to 5%, all of a sudden the value of your bonds falls by 30%, and you're underwater. So I do think some of these banks are in some trouble. Now, depositors are not in trouble. I want to make that clear. I don't want everybody to run out to their local bank and pull their money out. Deposits are safe, but I think some of these banks made some really bad investment decisions. So we'll see. Here's my worry, though, that, mark my words, and I pray that I'm wrong about this, but in 10 years, we're going to have just 4 super banks. And the community banks that all across America are going to be dinosaurs. And so you, instead of going to your little, remember It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, going to your little local, building and loan, you've got to go to this Citibank chapter or the JP Morgan chapter, and then you're going to have this incestuous relationship. Mark my words, Dan, it's going to be big government, big business, and big banks all in this kind of cahoots with each other.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then you won't have to worry about your credit score as much as your social credit score, whether you can even access the banking system. So that's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that dystopia. Yeah.
Wait, one thing on this, because I got to tell you, people are so angry. I think we touched on this when we talked last week. But these new mortgage rules it looks like they're going to take effect very soon, where for people who haven't heard about this, if you're someone who has a high down payment loan, and you're someone who has a good credit rating, then you're going to have to pay a special fee on your mortgage to pay for the people who have a bad credit rating and pay a low down payment loan on their mortgage, because this is equity. You see, it's not fair that people who have a bad credit rating have to pay a higher mortgage interest correctly and pay their bills, but also it's going to cause another housing crisis because you're going to have more and more people with low down payment loans taking up these mortgages they can't afford to pay.
Center cut Marxism. But the good news is we're just a few years away from nobody owning any property at all, and we're all going to be happy. Klaus Schwab says that, so I'm looking forward to that that aspect of the dystopia as well. I wanted to get to the debt ceiling. And so Kevin McCarthy's a pushback has prompted a sit down with the big guy, Mr. 10%, next week. So what do you think happens now? How stout of heart do you think McCarthy will be amid all the hewing and crying that if he doesn't compromise and just raise and do a clean debt ceiling raise, that the country will default and will spin into chaos and all that?
Well, it's interesting because, I was looking at it's interesting how the press spins things. So have you heard this, in the news reports, I was watching CNN yesterday, 70% of Americans want the debt ceiling raised. Well, I kind of want the debt ceiling raised, but I want it done. But then what they don't tell you is more than half of those people want the debt ceiling raised with spending cuts. But the media doesn't. And by the way, that also means if 70% of the people want the debt ceiling raised, you know what that means, Dan? 30% of the people don't even want the government to raise the debt ceiling.
And the other thing about that is 99% of the people don't know what the debt ceiling is.
They don't, but I think it's so ironic. 30% of the people think that things are so bad in Washington, they'd rather have the government default than continue to bankrupt our country. And I think that's and I'm not so sure they're wrong about that. So I think it's clear, it's very clear right now that Kevin McCarthy is holding all the cards, and the Democrats I talked to some of my Democratic friends yesterday on Capitol Hill. They completely misread this. They never thought that Kevin McCarthy could get a bill through the House, and I'm not always the biggest Kevin McCarthy fan, but I am saluting him. I mean, for him to get that bill through with 218 votes when they only had 221, I think it is. It was an act of genius, and it has these great provisions, no $80 billion for 87,000 new IRS agents, work requirements for welfare, produce American energy, all these very, very popular ideas. And I think that the Biden administration never thought he could get it done. And then this week, Monday, Janet Yellen has this press conference saying it's essential that Congress pass, the Republicans have to pass a debt ceiling bill. I'm like, hello, Janet, were you at some kind of climate change conference in some foreign country? Yes, they just passed the debt ceiling bill, you idiot. And so now, I just think they're in a quandary. And I don't think, at this point, I think the person who shouldn't negotiate is Kevin McCarthy. He's holding all the cards.
He is Steve Moore, economist, author of Govzilla, How the Relentless Growth of Government is Devouring Our Economy and Our Freedom. Steve, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys. Have a great week. Take care.
You too. And he, joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
It's almost time for the annual